we have impulses, whether it's online shopping, the desire to vote or not vote for a political candidate, whether it's even a small social interaction with a stranger. There's these impulses that we feel internally that we have control over. I can say hi to this person. I can hold the door for this person. I can eat the apple, or I can eat the chips. I can go to the gym, or I can watch TV. We feel these tugs and these pushes and these pulls in both directions, but ultimately they are somewhat constrained by necessity.
What is up, everybody? And welcome back to the Schooling Struggle Podcast. It is our belief that the only guarantee in life is that we are all going to struggle, and how we choose to embrace our struggles is what empowers us to become the best versions of ourselves. How is it going? My name is Pete, coming to you from Heartland, Vermont, and I'm fired up tonight because I have my friend Doug Anton back on the show, and Doug has signed on to be contributing part of this podcast journey, and Doug's going to be jumping on with me once a month to discuss all the cool, complex, enigmatic topics that flow through his brain. And Doug is such an awesome thinker, and he poses questions to me on a very regular basis that I would never even consider. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Doug. I love having you on the show.
Hey, Pete, thanks for having me. Super excited to be back as always.
And what I love about this is it takes the pressure off me to come up with topics that are relatable to the audience. And I asked Doug, hey, what do you want to talk about? And he's like, I got a host of different things I want to share. So as we get into it tonight, what I'm about to share, I think, is relevant to the conversation. And in that, the schooling struggle topic is one that I chose as the name of the podcast because I think it's just different things that people are navigating throughout their life, whether it's these giant, really, really difficult circumstances or obstacles or challenges, or just things that are just kind of out there that for us to think about and apply to our lives in ways that might be helpful or fruitful. So as we dive into tonight's topic, which Doug will introduce in a second, I'm going to lead the conversation off by sharing with the audience that I believe that there's people that truly, with every fiber of their being, believe that everything happens for a reason. And then there's people who just say that when times are really challenging or they're experiencing a major loss. I'm just going to share that and then turn it over to Doug to kind of take the next step of the conversation.
I think what you just described, Pete, is a pretty common and pretty typical way of looking at the world. And I would agree that most things do happen for a reason. I think that where you and I may differ, or where many people and I may differ, is that the reasons that we think are the reasons that things are happening aren't always those reasons. And what I mean by that is it's pretty common for most people to look around and look to see order and structure and justification and rationale for the way things are, right? There's a lot of bad things in the world. There's a lot of good things in the world. We want credit for the good things. We want to find reasons and excuses to justify the bad things. And I think the reality is somewhere in the middle. There are reasons that things happen, but they're often things that we don't grasp or comprehend. One common kind of question among the ages, struggled by philosophers for centuries, is the question of free will. Are we truly in control of our own lives? I would posit that we don't have free will. And oftentimes when I talk to people about this, that takes them aback at first. And they think, really? We don't have free will? Like, I chose what I'm wearing right now. I chose what I ate for breakfast this morning. I chose to have this conversation. I chose to be here, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not necessarily disagreeing that it felt like a choice to make those choices, but most people don't realize the degree to which they are influenced. We see this in marketing. We see this in psychology. We certainly see this in education. We see this in politics. The degree to which we are influenced by our context, by our circumstances, by our genetics, especially when it comes to health and fitness, by history, by evolution, by those around us. Nature versus nurture is one of the original ways that this debate was phrased hundreds of years, or maybe 100 years ago, so by psychologists. And I'm not sure that debate will ever be concluded. However, despite the continued debate between nature and nurture, we often forget to realize that that may be all that there is, and we often forget to acknowledge that fact. So, for example, when I say the word free will to you, Pete, can you think of a choice that you made today that was done on your own volition, your own free will?
I decided to record this podcast with you tonight at a certain time.
And what were the factors that went into deciding what time we recorded this?
When I was available based on the needs of my time and energy for my family members.
Were those factors things that you have a lot of control over?
Maybe some of them.
Okay. I would argue that the time that we're recording right now, or really anything, was really the result of a variety of circumstances, which most of which, nearly all, are often outside of our control. So, for example, the fact that today is a holiday probably changed the schedule about what time you had available with your family and the expectations around what you'd be doing at home with your wife and daughter. The fact that this is a night before the finals week in high school, and so you and I both have a fair amount of prepping and stress and maybe anxiety about the final week of the semester and getting ready for the next semester. My wife just returned from a trip from Morocco a few days ago, so on my home front, there's like factors there. So ultimately, many of the things that we're talking about are things that are somewhat external to us. We have some influence over them, but when it comes down to choice, our choice is almost always hindered, impacted, influenced by things that are external to us.
This is what I love about you, Doug. Just right into it. I love it. For the listeners out there, the focus of tonight's conversation is on free will. And Doug, from your perspective, I'd love if you could just give us your definition or your perspective on exactly what free will is.
So I've got the textbook dictionary definition right here, and I think most people would see the face value of it. Oxford Dictionary says free will is, quote, the power of acting without the constraint of necessity, comma, the ability to act at one's own discretion. Let's pick that apart a second. The power of acting without the constraint of necessity. We all have needs. We all have things we need to do. So, for example, right, we're breathing without thinking about them. We need to go to sleep at some time. We need to eat food, right? Maslow's hierarchy. We could talk about that another time. My point is, all of those things are externally imposed upon us, and those constraints are imposed upon us. So, at some point today, I needed to eat some food. Could I have gone without it? Maybe, probably. But as I got hungrier and hungrier, my desire to eat grew and grew and grew to the point where it was harder to ignore those things. Much of life is like that hunger, where we have impulses, whether it's online shopping, whether it's the desire to vote or not vote for a political candidate, whether it's even a small social interaction with a stranger. There's these impulses that we feel internally that we have control over. I can say hi to this person. I can hold the door for this person. I can eat the apple, or I can eat the chips. I can go to the gym, or I can watch TV. We feel these tugs and these pushes and these pulls in both directions, but ultimately they are somewhat constrained by necessity. If free will truly exists and people can act without that constraint, that's great. I don't think we live in that world because the constraints continually exert influence over us, especially when it comes to things that feel like choices, personal choices, health, fitness, finances, our social life, our well-being. Those things are influenced by so many external factors to ourselves. I think it's very difficult to believe that we have total control over those things.
So when you say total control over the things, or if I were to just bring it down and just say control over those things, the question becomes, how much of my life do I actually have control over? Or how much of my life's actions, thoughts, choices come from me? I think what I'm hearing you saying is a lot of those are dictated by other things that I might not be even recognizing.
Exactly. Well put. You said it better than I could. I know I get wordy at times. And this is an abstract philosophical concept, right? And this is the kind of thing that I think most people maybe don't want to think about, don't like to think about. I know that, this is the philosophy is a little niche interest of mine that maybe the average person isn't as interested in. But where I think we can really connect it to your listeners is when we take a look at some of those personal struggles and challenges that nearly everybody faces. So I'll give one that's commonly given as an example as a result of poor choices. So in the United States, we have an obesity epidemic. And oftentimes people will frame that in the lens of choices. So if people are making poor choices, that is leading them to become obese. Drug addiction often gets the same treatment, right? If only they could make a better choice, they wouldn't become addicted to drugs. Even things such as poverty and other circumstances in life often get chalked up to choice or poor choice. Conversely, I kind of challenge you and challenge all the listeners to ask themselves, do we give that same level of credit to the success stories? So the people who are extremely successful, the people who are able to overcome those struggles, do we say that's the result of their choices? At the NBA Finals, when LeBron or whoever goes up to the microphone, does the first thing he say is, I'd like to thank myself for being here and all the hard work that I put in and all the credit that I deserve? Or is it usually thankful to his coaches and the fans and his friends and his family And oftentimes, there's maybe a religious component as well. Those things are external factors that people generally have no problem giving credit to for the positive. But when it comes to the negative outcomes, we like to look for things to blame. And in the United States, at least, we often look towards individuals and we assign blame to them.
So if I were to say to you, I disagree with you. I have all sorts of choice. Today, I chose to watch football instead of do a workout in my basement. So there's proof to you that I have control because I had many, many, many choices, maybe even thousands of choices what to do with my time and energy during my time between 5 and 6 p.m. tonight. But I chose to sit on my spin bike instead of watch the NFL playoffs. How would you kind of push back on that?
That's a great example. So let me ask you this, Pete. Do you enjoy football? Do you enjoy watching football?
Yes.
Why do you enjoy it?
It's probably a really long answer, but I think it has to do with like an emotional connection to when I was a child and having good memories of watching football games in the presence of people that I cared about. And there's that innate like yearning to see mano a mano go against one another to see who's the victor.
So you just referenced your childhood and you also referenced the emotions that are attached to that. And so I would ask, the childhood experience that you had being exposed to football with friends and family around, was that something that you had a ton of control or choice over? Or is that somewhat of an external factor that kind of happened to you? And as a result of living through that experience, you kind of embraced that.
Yeah, I would say more of the second one.
Okay. Conversely, someone could equally say, yeah, when I was a kid, my dad always had football on the TV and he never, didn't spend enough time with me. And so I grew up hating football.
Right.
And the same person could go through, or a similar person could go through the same experiences and come out with very different results. And I would argue that this even furthers my point in that either way, their outcomes were dictated by their circumstances under which they had very little or no control over. The fact that there was football on to watch today, the fact that you had free time to watch football, the fact of when you ate breakfast and when you ate lunch, and kind of the hormones and the electrolytes and all these things in your body that dictated, I would kind of enjoy sitting on the couch and watching the game right now. All those things are forces of which happen to us, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So, in full disclosure, before recording the episode, Doug reached out and said, "Hey, do you want some information on free will?" I said, "Yes, please," because the topic of free will for me is like the solar system. It's just so far beyond where my mind goes, and it's just really a weird, uncomfortable thought for me. And so Doug sent me a couple of videos and some stuff to read. And I was watching one of the videos, and one of the guys in the videos, he was being interviewed by Andrew Huberman in his podcast. And correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, but basically what the guy was saying was that he doesn't believe that we have much free will at all, because all of our choices go back, just like you were talking about. They trace back to something, and that something trace back to something, and that trace back to something, and eventually it kind of traces back to our genes, our cells, our DNA, and that traces back to something. All trace back to something that we didn't have control over, like us being conceived and the cells that basically comprised and made up our body and these types of things. So what this guy was arguing or contending was that there is no free will because all that stuff was laid before we made that decision. And all that stuff is what yielded that decision, not that I made that decision on my own.
Exactly right. And that's a stance for those philosophy nerds out there. That's called causal determinism. I'm not necessarily advocating that personally. This is one of those things where, it's easy to have a fight or a stick in the fire, a log in the fire, so to speak, that without necessarily having to back it up. But that line of thinking, I think, aligns exactly with what I am trying to argue and advocate for, which is that more people consider the degree to which they and their lives are influenced by things around them. So maybe not even saying the word things you have control over or not, but things that are external to you. Your parents, your genetics, your upbringing, experiences you had as a child or yesterday, the hormones and the electrolytes and the imbalances within your brain. All of those things in many ways are external to us when it comes to our conscious choices.
So when it comes to trying to move forward or do the best with what you have, an example, I think our relationship is a great example of this. Like you and I have connected over many things, but one of them is we are kind of on a quest together to enhance our longevity or enhance our health span. And what can we do now so that we can do what we want when we're 85? And Doug and I actually have a date to jump in the car and drive to New Hampshire and get our blood tested for a bunch of different biomarkers, which I'm excited about. And Doug has kind of led me to do this. And we have lots of conversations about diet, about mobility, about exercise, all the things that we think we can do now to have more longevity, vitality, and health span as we age into our years. As we talk, Doug, you're making lifestyle changes right now. You're eating cleaner. You're doing some other things with your body that you think will have an impact on you later. So when it comes to what I would say, these choices that you're making that are shifting or changing your lifestyle, how does that play into this conversation?
I think it's important to not take kind of this fatalistic view of the free will discussion and say, well, then I can never change or I can never improve, right? Certainly, it would be blasphemy if I, as a teacher, would stand up here and advocate that. Well, things just kind of happen; you have no control over them, and your life, is on this one course, and you can't get off it. That's not what I'm saying. What I would say is that external factors are going to influence us strongly, oftentimes, sometimes maybe weakly, sometimes more strong. We have some control, or at least it feels like we have control over how we respond to those things. So very Pavlovian, stimuli, right? So Pavlov's dogs, the researcher rings the bell, right? The dogs start to salivate because, they know the bell signals dinner time. Humans can do the same thing. I would argue that my being on this podcast right now, this moment, here is in large part due to the fact that your Better Than Yesterday class last year was scheduled to take place in my classroom during my prep block. I think that opened the door for you and me to have way more conversations, go in depth on some of the things we had loosely talked about while passing in the hallway for years. I think the Morocco trip, also the stars aligning, so to speak, that allowed you to participate on that trip, spending that time. Those were things that happenstance, they really were arbitrary. We can look back at them and identify them as meaningful now. And we can say, I'm so glad I chose to go on that trip. I'm so glad, you chose to have your class in my room. I chose to stay in the room and kind of be part of the class at times. But ultimately, those were external factors and circumstance. And I'm thankful that they are there. The second thing I would say is just because we are often influenced by things around us, we can, to some degree, choose the things around us then. So if I know that, man, that sugar craving I get, that's morning cereal, I really love that. If I've got cereal in the pantry, I'm going to want to have some. But if I wake up and I go to that pantry and there's no cereal in it, that's going to make it that much easier to make a different choice. And certainly this is like kind of, rolling over to a topic we mentioned the last time I was on called choice architecture, which is how big business and firms know this stuff, and they design menus and software and all these kind of things to help nudge us to the choices that ultimately are more profitable for them. But we can kind of do the same things to ourselves, right? If I open the fridge and the first thing I see is the broccoli and the lettuce and the makings of a salad, and I have to reach deep into the back to grab the leftover pizza, that's going to make it that much more likely that I'll make that choice. So it's an interesting question, right? How can we still believe in self-improvement and self-betterment? Can people still change? And of course, I'm not advocating for this fatalistic mindset where change is impossible and everything that's going to happen to us is predestined, and basically we're, victims of a cruel roller coaster ride through life and have no ability to get on or off. What I'm advocating instead is that we are the product of our circumstances and a variety of factors outside of our control. So, for example, you used me as an example just a minute ago, referencing some of the lifestyle changes I'm trying to make. And I would argue that the fact that we're having this conversation right here, right now, is a direct result of a few of those arbitrary factors I mentioned. For example, your Better Than Yesterday class had a huge role in me listening into the things you were talking about, joining in the class unofficially at times, and a lot of the conversations you and I would have just on a daily basis leading up to that class really brought us a bit closer. And then, of course, our experience in Morocco, where you and I went from acquaintances at school, I wouldn't necessarily even say especially close. We became very, very close on our trip to Morocco. And I think those two factors right there had a huge impact on the lifestyle changes I've made. And both of those things are something that really had, no control other than circumstance.
For the listeners that might not have listened to past episodes, last year I created a class called Better Than Yesterday, which in addition to fitness was kind of a focus on a mindset piece. And I asked the school if I could teach it in a classroom instead of in the weight room. And circumstances had it that I taught in Doug's classroom while he was having his prep block when he didn't have students, and he chose to stay in the room and do his work while I was teaching. So he was by choice kind of listening and chiming in with the class and interacting with students and interacting with me over the course of that block in the schedule in our school day. And then Doug runs a global citizenship trip each year to different parts of the world and brings groups of students. And I ended up being a chaperone on that trip with him. And he and I were bunkmates and shared many, and when I say small rooms, by the U.S. standard, maybe even closet-sized rooms with really small beds that we were just kind of crammed in together. We did have separate beds every night, but we had some really great conversations and connected that way. So that's what Doug's referring to when he's talking about circumstances that we didn't choose bringing us together and kind of being the launching point for maybe indirectly many of the lifestyle changes that you're making now.
I think absolutely. And I can already hear someone saying, well, but wait, Doug, didn't you picked Pete to go with you on this trip? Wasn't that a choice? I think you probably know this, Pete, but you weren't the first choice, or you weren't the first option in terms of chaperones.
Or the second, or the third, or the fifth.
But seriously, I mean, just again, going back to results of circumstances, there was other people that at the time, Katie and I were, my colleague and I who run the trip, we were closer with, people who we had traveled with before and kind of had this established precedent. And there were circumstances in their lives that led them to say, nope, sorry, I can't go this year. And as we worked our way down the list, eventually your name came up, and I'm super thankful that it did, obviously. That's just one small example of that kind of domino effect of circumstance, of context, of history, of chance. I think a good word to use for many of these things, I've had kind of a lot of debates with some of my students on these topics lately, especially there's a philosophy class that I don't teach, but a lot of my students are in this philosophy class at school, and many of them come chat some of their ideas with me because they know that I like this stuff. A lot of them say, it can't all be random, or it can't all be, but it's not predestiny. It's not up to the stars aligning, or is it religion, or what is it? And I think one of the best words for all of this stuff is arbitrary. Right? It is arbitrary. It was arbitrary that, my prep block happened to be the block that you're better than yesterday class. It wasn't necessarily, sure, there was someone's choice in the computer system as they're making the schedule. It wasn't necessarily intent. It wasn't with a purpose. It wasn't with a part of some greater fate and some bigger plan. It was just happenstance, arbitrary. And many things are like that. I think I challenge all the listeners out there to kind of go through their daily, the day-to-day life and look for how many things that happen kind of to them don't necessarily have bigger purpose or greater meaning, but just happen to be the way they are and have an influence on us, positive or negative. And I think it's kind of freeing, ironically, when we can start looking at our lives in the world through this lens, because then we start to realize that things don't necessarily happen for a reason, and that's a good thing, right? We're not pawns in some cosmic play, or we have the ability to kind of make our own lives, or our lives are not set in stone and anything can always change. I find that to be a pretty freeing attitude myself.
So when it comes to this topic of free will and the kind of the mindset that you have toward it, in line with the goal or the root of this podcast is schooling struggle, or to navigate the challenges and obstacles in our lives, how do you apply what you know about this to your life in a way that you see as helpful to help you navigate your life?
I would say first, one of the things that I found the most success with is framing the question differently when thinking about personal life changes, significant change. Many people, have found themselves looking in the mirror or out for a hike, or, just in the car alone and thinking to themselves, what kind of person am I? I'm a kind person. I'm a hard worker. I'm a, fill in the blank. We identify as certain things. One thing that I've started doing is switching that and saying, I'm the type of person that, and then filling in that blank. So I used to think of myself as, I'm a fit person. I'm an active person. And while that was true, in part because of, basketball and hiking and some of those things, the truth is those things were easy for me because they were fun. And so for me to have said at the time, I'm the kind of person that makes healthy choices, I don't know if I could really have said that 5 or 10 years ago. My health and my fitness and those things were kind of a byproduct, a lucky byproduct of circumstances that I happen to enjoy exercising. I happen to have a lot of friends who like those same things. I happen to be blessed with the time, the resources to do those things frequently. And so in the past few years, I've started to say, I'm the type of person that can make healthy choices when they're not easy, because I don't think I used to be that kind of person. I'm the type of person who will pick a healthier option when confronted with alternatives. I'm the kind of person that can say no to the free donuts when the teacher or students walking around from classroom to classroom with the extra donuts or whatever. I think that framing has really changed my perception, and I'm curious to hear what you think about that, because I think I've maybe heard you say those things before.
Yes. Yeah. I'm the type of person that is a big one for me. And it's funny, just those few words have had a massive impact on my life, because a really good example of that is I struggled in math in high school. So I decided I suck at math. I'll never be good at math. And the reason for that is I suck at math. Like, that was kind of my mindset, right? So I did poorly in math in high school. I went to college and became a business major. And the type of math that was required for me to accomplish wasn't the type of math that I sucked at. Like, it was economics and accounting. And I could do that for whatever reason. That algebra and geometry didn't jive with me, but those did. And I graduated with a business degree. And then, of course, like every wise businessman, I took my business degree and put it somewhere. I don't even know where it is. And I went and traveled the world and lived out of the back of my truck for the next 6 years. And 6 years later, I decided I wanted to go back to school to become a teacher. And when I went to get into my teaching program, they're like, yeah, you can start this teaching program, but you don't have any college math. I was like, well, yeah, I didn't need to take those types of math classes as a business major. Like, well, as a teacher, you're going to. So in order for you to get into this program this summer, you need to go to some college and take this math class. Every college offers this math class. Just take it. So I was like, oh, crap. So I signed up. I was living in Boston at the time. I drove to UMass Lowell 3 times a week, and I took this math class that was an college algebra class. And I decided that A, I was paying for the class, and B, I just had a different mindset when I was 27 than I did when I was 17. And I was just going to try really, really friggin' hard to learn math. And I crushed the class. And by the end of the class, I decided I was no longer bad at math. I was just bad at things that I wasn't willing to apply myself to. Right. So, like, that was the first time that I realized, like, it's not that I suck at math. I'm the type of person that chooses to decide where I'm dumb and where I'm not dumb, or where I can achieve and where I cannot achieve. And that was a really big eye opener for me going forward. So, like you just said, I've learned that it's like, I'm the type of person that, and you can kind of fill in, chooses to be successful where I choose to be successful. The example that I always give is when my daughter was born and I could no longer work out after school. I had to work out in the morning because she was a good sleeper. And I literally had to set the alarm clock for 4:30 every morning. And I had to set the alarm clock each night and say to myself out loud, not too loud because my wife was sleeping next to me in the bed, but like, I'm the type of person that does not hit snooze and gets up at 4:30. And I really believe there's so much power in that. And just saying those words to ourselves. And, some people believe that it's not our thoughts that dictate our words, but it's our words that dictate our thoughts, and our thoughts that dictate our actions, and our actions dictate our destiny. Maybe an entire different episode for that saying right there. But I've learned so much about that and applying it to my life, and just with small things and with big things. I'm the type of person that breaks giant tasks down into small tasks. I'm the type of person that looks someone in the eye when I meet them. These different things that I'm going to deem as important in my life, I'm going to use that and apply it. And I think that has had a massive positive impact on me. But what I think I'm hearing you say is that we're not just going to lay down and say, well, everything's predetermined. I'm just going to eat Doritos and watch Netflix for the rest of my life because I don't have any say in what goes on in my life. We do make choices. Those choices, given our circumstances, are up to us, but we can also shape our environment and apply, I don't know, best practices of life to ourselves, or the art of perseverance and living, however you want to word it. But I don't know if that's a really kind of long-winded response to what you asked. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I think it does. And I think I'm glad to hear you affirm the power of that phrasing. I think another thing that people may find useful is that concept of shaping their environment. It's really, really, really difficult to undergo a complete, a significant life transformation, right? How many times on January 2nd or January 3rd, do you see people at the gym who are making that commitment, or you see people at the grocery store who are buying that's fresh produce or whatever, and they're using the beginning of the year, that New Year's resolution as this is the point where I'm going to make a change. And yet we know from study after study and anecdote after anecdote and personal experience, I'm sure for nearly every person on this planet, that 5 days later, a month later, a year later, whatever it is, how often do we fail to make those things stick? It is crushing, I think, to some degree, if we were to say, wow, I had the freedom of choice, I have free will, and I still couldn't do that. That makes me feel like a failure. And that's where I'm going with the point of it's actually freeing to kind of lean away from that notion. We don't need to beat ourselves up over our failures. And by the way, we don't necessarily get all the credit for our successes either, right? We can lean into the external factors. We can try to craft that environment. So like you said, setting that alarm for 4:30 every day required the ritual of saying that to yourself at night and actively doing that. Right? It's one thing for you and I to say something at 10 o'clock in my classroom at school and say, yep, tonight I'm going to do this. I'm going to wake up, I'm going to set my alarm, and tomorrow morning when it goes off, I'm going to get out of bed, put my shoes on, go for that run, and that's how I'm going to start my day. There are so many steps between making that commitment and it actually happening for that that are required for you to be successful. You are responsible for some of them, but not all of them. And so you have to put yourself in a position where you will be more likely to be successful. And there are so many things people can do that are small, that are little things that I think have the power to open and unlock big change.
Yeah, I think that's huge. So when you think about this topic, free will, and you think about lifestyle changes that you can and want to make for a better tomorrow for whatever reason, is it a part of your process, Doug, to say, all right, here's the reality of my circumstance. I want to eat less added sugar, but I recognize that in my house, there's this added sugar, or I recognize that in the summer or wherever time of year my family and I go out to ice cream, or we go out to eat. When we go out to eat, we get dessert, or there's always some sort of holiday. And you take inventory of the environment and all the obstacles that might block your path towards success with that lifestyle change, or you just say, I'm going to make this lifestyle change and I'm just going to kind of persevere through it. Like, is part of that mindset of that free will to really diagnose and break down all of the obstacles and the barriers that could be there? Is that part of your process when you set those goals?
I would start by acknowledging I don't think I can persevere through that. Right, given enough stimuli and external influence, I'm not strong enough. If the one kid walks by my classroom with a donut, I can turn it down. But by the 20th kid, and by the end of the day, or if the stars align, and I mean that in a non-fate destiny kind of sense, but just if the right set of circumstances happen, I don't have the willpower to turn down that donut. And so what I need to do is make sure that I don't have that 17th kid showing up in the classroom with the donut, so to speak. I need to make sure that in my household, right, yep, I can turn down the Oreos. If the Oreos are the only thing in the back of the pantry and I'm not going to go in there often, I can turn that down. But if when I open the pantry, there's the Oreos, and when I open the fridge, there's the ice cream, and when I go to the bread box, there's the donuts, if all those things add up, I probably can't turn down that much in terms of the craving and the urges and that, when it comes to sugar, especially, right? Talk about addiction. And so I need to structure my environment so that I don't have those things. So shopping is often one of the easiest things, right? Not going shopping when you're hungry makes it so much easier to not buy those things. And then when you're home, you're stuck with what you got. So if I'm hungry and then apple's right there, it's really easy to grab it. But if I'm hungry and there's 15 different things next to the apple or in front of the apple or that require less prep or cleanup than the apple, that's when you get into trouble. And so simplifying, systematizing, and structuring those choices and those contexts and those environments to make you more likely to be successful. The third thing I would say is the most powerful, and arguably the most powerful of all, is that we are hugely, profoundly influenced by the people that we spend our time with. Numerous studies, I can't quote any off the top of my head, but the basic principle is that we become more like the people we spend time with. So, right, there's some saying, show me your friends now and I'll show you your future in 5 years, something like that. We truly do become more like the people around us. Again, I challenge you and the audience to think about, your coworkers, your family members, your closest friends, and think about yourself over the past 5, 10, 15 years. There's a bit of a convergence where we become more like them and they become more like us. And so who you choose, quote unquote, to spend your time with and the people that you embrace in your life through circumstance or otherwise, that can have a huge impact on that environment, on the options that you're going to see when it comes to self-growth and things like that. If you surround yourself by people who also like to do hard things, who also like to challenge themselves, who also like to set goals and hold each other accountable, you're more likely to do that. But if you know that if you're surrounding yourself with people who won't hold themselves accountable, who won't accomplish those goals, you'll become more like them. And so that's another area where I would argue that we have a bit of choice in that who we spend our time with and how we spend our time with those people.
Doug and I both have kids around the same age, and I was once told that you are a parent until your kid is in 6th grade, and from then on, you're just a counselor. And the difference is around 6th grade is when your child starts to spend more time with their friends than they do with you, being in school or in sports or whatever it is that they're doing. And I thought that was an interesting thing to remember as I'm going through this whole child rearing process. And I think that holds so much weight. And I mean, there's no clearer depiction for us than just seeing groups of high schoolers, right? The kids who spend time with each other and the ways that they spend time with each other. It's tricky. I talk to my students about this, about the people we spend most time with, because my heart goes out to, and I have so much compassion for people who are in living circumstances around other people that shape them in negative ways, so to speak. A lot of our students don't have a choice of who lives in their household with them and how do we navigate that. And I find for many of my students, when we talk about focusing on the aspects of our life or where we have control and where we don't, a lot of the anxiety and frustration comes from people who we live with that bring us down.
And I think that speaks to the power of schools, arguably more than the academics or social or emotional or anything like that. Schools are typically, hopefully, filled with competent, caring, loving adults who will be good role models. And having our, the youth of our nation spend time in and with and around those people in environments with them, I think is invaluable. It's not going to be that algebra class or that thesis statement that helps get that student out of poverty or out of a traumatic situation or something like that. It's going to be surrounded by caring, loving adults who can model good pro-social behaviors and other lifestyle things like that. And I think that's another way that we can use kind of the free will concept to be a resource for those around us, right? Talk about being, I'm the kind of person that I strive to be the type of person that other people, regardless of their circumstance, will identify as a resource, as a steady ship, as someone that they can go to be listened to talk with, to ask advice for, because that can help people more than you realize.
Yeah, that's why I love having you on the show. Truly, I'm super, super grateful. And I know your goal tonight was to kind of start off with the philosophical or the theoretical side of free will and then weave it into tactical ways that people can apply to their lives to be better versions of themselves. And I thought you did a wonderful job of that this evening. Really cool.
One of the goals that I've set for myself in coming on the podcast when you first asked me to be on a bit more regularly is I think of myself as someone who likes to think a lot and has some big ideas, but maybe struggles to always communicate them in a concrete and practical way to a lot of people. And so what I'd ask you and anyone, all the listeners out there, is to try to put these ideas into practice in a concrete way in the next week. And I think there's a few ways you can do that, but one of the easiest ways is simply the next time you're faced with a choice, I want you to write down, identify, you can type it on your phone, whatever you want, before you even make the choice, all the different competing factors, right? It could be something as simple as what you eat for breakfast or what outfit you're wearing that day, but try to identify all the things that are kind of pulling you one way or another towards one choice. And I think you'll find that list is longer than you realize. And I think that you may find that power freeing. So try that the next time.
I want to ask you one more question. Would you be willing to do a quick example of that from your life to give the listener like an idea of kind of what, because if you were to say to me, write down all the factors that go into my breakfast choice, like you spent more time thinking about these factors than I have. So can you set an example for me in that regard?
Sure. I'll give you a good example. Well, what I think is a good example. Last night I was at basketball, pickup basketball with my friends, and
so So you play basketball with adults?
Yes, yep, adult pickup basketball. But I brought my kids, and there's a couple other guys who bring their kids as well in the same age, and so the kids kind of run around the gym, and it's a lot of fun for them. And we play from about 4:30 to 7:00, and so it's kind of prime dinner time. Kind of too late to eat dinner beforehand, or too early to eat dinner beforehand, too late to have dinner when you get home. So we usually pack a big, picnic, little snacks, snack pack for the girls. And as we were leaving, they ate plenty of snacks, but as we were leaving, my daughter says, "Dad, can we go to McDonald's on the way home?" And so I'm sitting there, right? And it's snowy and it's already 7:20 and I'm tired and dripping with sweat. And, I'm trying to get the girls packed up, get their boots on, get them in the car. And I'm thinking, okay, McDonald's, I have about a minute and a half to make this decision before I get down to the red light at the bottom of the hill, whether I'm going to take a right, go down Route 14 to go home, or whether I'm going to go straight through that light up to White River Junction McDonald's.
And are
I
you
said,
actually going through this process in your brain? You're thinking to yourself, I have 90 seconds to make this decision.
oh, absolutely.
This is the way your brain works. This is the veil that I want to pull back for the listeners, because this is what makes you, and this is what's amazing. Okay, go ahead.
So I had no idea what I should say. I honestly, part of me said, no, I don't, I don't want you girls to be having a lot of McDonald's. And I, certainly the fact that they can identify McDonald's by name. And I don't know if we're going to get sued for this in the podcast, but generally I'd prefer that they not eat a lot of fast food. Let's leave it at that. But we have certainly had it before. The flip side is they're both saying they're hungry. And I know that the snacks I provided were fruit and veggies and things like that, but didn't have a lot of protein or weren't necessarily completely balanced. I also want to kind of reward them or encourage them to have a positive experience coming to basketball with me, because it lets my wife have some free time at home and get things done or have her own time or whatever. And so, I'm truly thinking that. And then, I say, okay, well, if we go to McDonald's, what are you going to get? And then they both say chicken nuggets. And I'm like, well, chicken nuggets by themselves. Okay, maybe that's okay, but you're going to want the sauce, right? The sweet and sour sauce. And Maddie's like, oh, yeah, I love the sauce. And she's like, but it has added sugar, right? And I said, it does have some added sugar, yeah, which is like not ideal. Maybe we can just have them plain. And then Maddie goes, you know what? Well, never mind. I don't want chicken. We don't need to go to McDonald's anymore. We can eat something when we get home. I'm like, okay, great. I'm 1 for 2 now, but now Riley wants to, my younger one, she's 4. She wants to get McDonald's still. And so I now face, I've reached in my pocket and I have a lollipop, right? And so I do the quick calculation, 2 or 3 grams of added sugar and a lollipop. Is that worth the time that's going to buy me to get her home and get her some oatmeal or, scrambled eggs or something like that? So I say, hey, Riley, how about I give you a lollipop instead and we go straight home? And she's like, okay, yeah, that works. So literally with that, the lollipop came out at the traffic light. Luckily, there's a red light, so I bought a few extra seconds. But I mean, in my mind, as this all was happening, I'm thinking, what kind of habits, while I want them to enjoy basketball, I don't want them to always think of going to basketball. The treat is, on the way home, we get something. I want them to enjoy the free time to kind of run around the side of the gym and see some friends and watch us play to be the reward. I'm thinking that I also want them to value experiences with other people and value healthy choices. And so their friends that were there also are very, they eat very well and they had healthy snacks. And arguably my kids' lunchbox was probably less healthy than theirs. So I'm already considering that they're like comparing themselves to others. I'm thinking the other factors that led to me that decision is that when I was a kid, I liked going to McDonald's. I went once every 6 months, maybe as a kid. It really was a special treat with my parents, and it kind of felt like you're getting this special thing, and maybe with one parent was there, the other parent wasn't. It was like, all right, like this will be our treat. We won't tell the other one. So I don't know. There was all these competing things pulling at me in both directions. And let alone, of course, I had to ask myself, well, if I'm going to go, would I get something for myself? And then my initial reaction is, no, I'm not. I'm not even hungry. But then as we, Riley's saying, yeah, McDonald's, I'm thinking, milkshake would taste pretty good right now. I'm so tired and thirsty. And so maybe not as in-depth and as hectic as that, but those are some of the factors you could consider that go into a simple decision as to where you're going to eat or what you're going to eat.
And I know enough about Doug to know that he is truly weighing all the decisions and all the factors and all the possible outcomes that come from whatever decision he moves forward with. And it's really cool to have these conversations with him. We've had many conversations off the record about all different types of things, investing and health and wellness. And it's really, really cool. So yeah, Doug, I am super, super excited that you have committed to come on a more regular basis to have these conversations. They just fire me up. And I think that there's some really cool tactical pieces that the listeners can take and apply to their lives. Thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to bringing you on in about a month from now.
Well, like I said, Pete, I really appreciate you inviting me and all the kind words. I love having these kind of conversations, and hopefully I get a little bit better at it every week. And ultimately, it really wasn't my choice to be here. So I'll leave you with that.
Perfect. To all the listeners out there, we appreciate your ears. We thank you so very much for your time. We are incredibly grateful for your attention. On behalf of Douglas, Anton, we are the School and Struggle Podcast. We are out.